You don't notice it happening at first. You think you're simply being responsible, disciplined, focused on your goals. You optimize your mornings, track your workouts, read books that promise to improve your performance, and schedule every minute of your life with the precision of a machine. And everyone applauds you for it. But somewhere along the way, without even feeling the shift, you stop living and start managing yourself like a failing company desperately chasing quarterly growth. And the tragedy is that you think this is freedom. Byung-Chul Han warned us about this exact illusion. He said, modern society doesn't need tyrants anymore because each individual has become their own tyrant. You don't need a boss breathing down your neck. You do that job better than anyone. You force yourself to be productive every second. You punish yourself when you're not. You squeeze meaning, joy, rest, silence, and even your own identity through the filter of, how can I use this? The result isn't a stronger life. It's the slow, quiet collapse of your inner world. And here's the part you don't want to admit. You've forgotten how to enjoy something without turning it into a project. You can't pick up a guitar without wondering if you should record it. You can't draw without thinking you're wasting time. You can't even rest without feeling guilty. Your entire existence has been swallowed by the same logic that drives the market. Produce more, become more, optimize more, always more. And yet, you feel emptier than ever. So let me ask you a dangerous question, one that might disrupt the identity you've spent years constructing. When was the last time you did something completely useless? Something with no goal, no metric, no audience, no potential for monetization? If your answer is, I don't remember, then this video is not simply interesting for you. It is necessary. Because in a world that demands constant performance, choosing to do something useless might be the only act that can save your life. So stay with me. This will be uncomfortable. You might feel exposed. But if you listen carefully, you may discover the one thing your exhausted soul has been begging you to remember. Not how to work better, but how to be human again. You were not born believing that every moment must justify its existence. That belief was planted in you. It grew slowly, quietly, like mold spreading in a room you stopped noticing. As a child, your desires were pure, immediate, uncalculated. You drew because colors fascinated you, not because you hoped to improve a skill. You played because play is what life does when it's not being monitored. You explored because existence itself was enough. Then adulthood arrived, and with it a system that does not tolerate spaces that cannot be monetized, optimized, or instrumentalized. Byung-Chul Han explains that we no longer live under a disciplinary regime where external authorities impose no upon us. Instead, we live inside a subtler, far more insidious system, the achievement society. Here the command is not prohibition but stimulation. Not you must not, but you can, you should. You must outperform yourself. This shift appears liberating on the surface. There is no visible oppressor, no factory supervisor screaming at you, no rigid schedule imposed by someone else. Instead, there is a constant whisper inside your own skull. Do more, become more, improve. Don't waste time. Don't fall behind. Don't relax. The brilliance and cruelty of this system is that it transforms your interiority into a marketplace. Your thoughts become investments. Your feelings become productivity leaks. Your time becomes capital that must be maximized. Even your personality becomes a brand you must manage. You are not just performing for society. You are performing for yourself. Under the gaze of an internalized boss, you can never fire, never escape, never satisfy. Han describes this new subject as the entrepreneur of itself, a person who manages their own life as if it were a business in constant need of scaling. You think you are acting freely, but every decision is guided by the invisible pressure to produce value. Value for whom? Often no one, often nothing. But the logic of performance has lodged itself so deeply into your psyche that you cannot imagine life operating by any other rhythm. This is why you feel exhausted even when no one is asking anything of you. This is why you can't rest even when you have free time. This is why leisure feels suspicious to you, why relaxation feels like a trap, why silence feels like a waste. You have been trained to view your own inner life as territory to be colonized, optimized, harvested. And once this colonization occurs, nothing inside you is sacred anymore. Not your joy, not your curiosity, not your creativity, not even your sense of self. Everything becomes material. Everything becomes a means to an end. Everything becomes a tool, and a tool that isn't constantly producing begins to feel like a failure. This is the psychological violence Han identifies. The world doesn't need to punish you anymore. You do the punishing yourself. You don't need external control. You control yourself. You don't need a system forcing you to work. You willingly turn your entire life into work. You become a one-person corporation, endlessly grinding for goals you didn't even choose. And the worst part? This colonization happens quietly, invisibly. It feels normal. It feels responsible. It feels like the right thing to do. But deep down, your soul knows better. Deep down, something in you remembers a different way of existing, a way that didn't hurt, a way that didn't feel like running in place while calling it progress. Something in you remembers a time before you surrendered your inner life to the logic of the market. And that memory, fragile, faint, but still alive, is the key to reclaiming yourself. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. There is a moment in every exhausted life when positivity becomes indistinguishable from violence. You don't notice it at first. The culture tells you that motivation is empowering, that drive is noble, that pushing yourself is a sign of strength. But what happens when the push never ends? What happens when the demand for more becomes infinite? What happens when "yes, we can" quietly transforms into "if you don't, you're nothing"? Byung-Chul Han argues that the excess of positivity in modern life, this constant message that every barrier is conquerable, every limit negotiable, every weakness fixable, creates a psychological environment where failure is no longer circumstantial, it is existential. When everything is supposedly possible, the only explanation for your exhaustion is that you are the problem, not the system, not the expectations, you. And that is where the collapse begins. The achievement society does not break you through force. It breaks you through seduction. It doesn't need to forbid anything. It only needs to whisper that you're capable of more. It turns ambition into obligation, potential into pressure, self-improvement into self-punishment. Eventually, you internalize a single, devastating belief. If I'm not constantly achieving, I don't deserve to exist. This belief is why your mind refuses to rest, even when your body begs for it. Why lying in bed feels irresponsible. Why taking a walk without tracking your steps feels pointless. Why reading fiction feels like a luxury you can't afford. Why any moment without visible progress feels like a personal failure. Rest stops being a human need and becomes a moral weakness. Silence becomes suspicious. Doing nothing becomes a threat to your identity. Han calls this the psychological mechanism behind burnout. Not the overload of tasks, but the overload of the self. You are not crushed by external pressure. You are crushed by the weight of the person you think you must become. Your drive becomes your prison. Your goals become weapons. Your potential becomes a cage. And because the achievement subject is both master and slave, exploiter and exploited, you cannot walk away from the system because the system is inside you. You carry your own exhaustion the way a snail carries its shell, inseparable, inescapable, self-constructed. You work yourself not because someone demands it, but because you don't know who you are without the work. This is why burnout today feels so personal. People don't just say, "I'm tired." They say, "I'm failing." They say, "I'm not enough." They say, "Something is wrong with me." Burnout becomes an injury to the soul, not the schedule. And the darkest part of all, the more exhausted you become, the more the achievement mindset tightens its grip. You respond to your depletion with even more self-optimization. New habits, new routines, new hacks, new goals. The same mentality that broke you is the one you turn to for healing, which ensures that healing never comes. This is the collapse Han warns about, a society where the individual burns out not because the world demands too much, but because the self has become an endless project, a battlefield where you are simultaneously the soldier, the general, and the enemy. There comes a point when the only question worth asking is, what if the problem isn't that you're not doing enough? What if the problem is the belief that you must always be doing something? Until you confront that belief, the collapse continues quietly, invisibly, until it becomes total. There is a form of suffering that doesn't announce itself with pain, but with disappearance. Not the disappearance of objects or opportunities or relationships, but something far more intimate. The disappearance of your own inner world. Byung-Chul Han describes a phenomenon that most people never notice until it is almost irreversible: the erosion of the contemplative capacity. In a performance-driven life, contemplation isn't just neglected, it is pathologized. Stillness becomes laziness. Silence becomes unproductive. Slowness becomes a threat. And so the very states of being that nourish the soul are quietly eliminated in favor of constant motion. But what happens to a human being who forgets how to be still? Han argues that the disappearance of contemplation is not a minor inconvenience. It is a catastrophe for the psyche. Contemplation is the space where meaning forms, where emotions settle, where the mind breathes. It is the interior room in which the self is allowed to exist without performing. When this room collapses, you don't merely lose rest, you lose depth, you lose interiority. You lose the sense of being someone rather than something. In a society obsessed with performance, you no longer walk through life, you accelerate through it. You no longer inhabit moments, you consume them. Time stops being a medium of existence and becomes a tool of optimization. Every minute must be used, justified, transformed into output. And slowly, without fanfare, the human being becomes shallow, reactive, fragmented. Hyperactivity replaces reflection, information replaces understanding, stimulation replaces meaning. You stop thinking in the philosophical sense and start calculating. You stop experiencing and start managing. Han calls the result the burnout soul, a soul that is not exhausted by work, but by the violent absence of inner life. It is a soul constantly pushed outward, unable to fall back into itself. Without contemplation, your emotions never fully resolve. They simply accumulate. Without contemplation, your desires never crystallize. You chase whatever the world applauds. Without contemplation, your suffering never transforms. It only repeats. In this state, even pleasure loses its substance. You can binge entertainment, collect experiences, take trips, buy things, but none of it penetrates deeply enough to create meaning. Everything slides across the surface of your mind, like water on glass. That is why modern people feel empty even while living their best life. It's not because they lack experiences, it's because they lack the inner space where experiences become truth. And this is precisely why Han insists that the contemplative dimension is essential. Without it, you become a creature of pure exteriority, a being defined entirely by actions, productivity, performance, and metrics. You become visible to the world, but invisible to yourself. You succeed publicly and fail privately. You impress others and feel hollow when you're alone. You become, in Han's words, a laboring animal, incapable of dwelling. The tragic irony is that contemplation requires the very thing the achievement society fears most: uselessness. Moments with no agenda, no goal, no measurable outcome. The kinds of moments where you're not trying to improve yourself but simply allowing yourself to exist. And this is why a useless hobby is not trivial. It is sacred. It rebuilds the inner room that the world demolished. It restores your capacity to breathe, to feel, to imagine, to be. It reconnects you to the depth you lost while trying to become a more efficient version of yourself. It is not leisure. It is rescue. It is not indulgence. It is survival. And without reclaiming this space of sacred uselessness, the destruction continues, not loudly, not dramatically, but silently, like a soul slowly suffocating in its own absence. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. There is a reason the world makes you feel guilty for doing something that brings you joy but produces nothing. A reason you feel irresponsible when you paint badly, or play music without improving, or spend an afternoon lost in a puzzle that advances no goal. You think this guilt is personal, a matter of temperament or upbringing. It isn't. It is political. It is cultural. It is engineered. A useless hobby is dangerous to the achievement society because it cannot be absorbed into its logic. It rejects productivity. It rejects optimization. It rejects the idea that your worth is tied to output. In a world that wants every part of you to become capital, the one thing that cannot be monetized becomes an act of defiance. Byung-Chul Han understood this with brutal clarity. The neoliberal system does not need to control your body if it can colonize your mind. And the moment you believe that every minute must be justified, the moment you treat even your joy as a resource to be extracted, the system has succeeded. The chains are internal, the enforcement is self-directed. This is why a useless hobby is not a pastime. It is an interruption. It disrupts the circuitry of self-exploitation. It forces the mind to enter a mode the system has taught you to avoid, the mode of being rather than doing. Think about what happens when you do something purely for its own sake. Suddenly, there is no audience. No metrics, no improvement curve, no return on investment. And without these structures, something ancient and nearly forgotten awakens inside you: presence. When you are not trying to turn the activity into something else, you can finally experience it for what it is. Your senses return, your attention deepens, your interiority expands. The useless hobby reveals the extent of your colonization precisely by how uncomfortable it feels at first. You sit down to draw and immediately hear the whisper, "This is pointless." You play a video game for pleasure and feel the anxiety, "I could be learning something useful." You walk without tracking your steps and feel lost. If there's no metric, what's the point? That voice is not your own. It is the internalized overseer Han warned about, the tyrant you've become to yourself. This is why the useless hobby matters. It breaks that voice. It interrupts the cycle of self-surveillance. It reminds the psyche that existence does not need justification. And through that reminder, it restores something the achievement society cannot tolerate: freedom. Not the shallow freedom of endless choices, but the deeper freedom of inhabiting a moment without purpose. The freedom to be unmeasured, the freedom to be unproductive, the freedom to be human. Han insists that true freedom is found not in the ability to pursue infinite goals, but in the ability to step outside the logic of goals entirely. A useless hobby is one of the last remaining sanctuaries where this kind of freedom is still possible. It returns you to yourself, not the self you perform for others, not the self you manage like a brand, but the quiet, private self that existed before the world demanded you become something impressive. In a society that wants to turn you into an efficient machine, doing something useless is rebellion. It is a refusal to let your identity be consumed by productivity. It is a declaration that your life belongs to you, not to the market, not to the algorithm, not to the endless pressure to become more. A useless hobby is not a hobby. It is therapy. It is resistance. It is recovery. It is proof that your soul has not been completely conquered. Before you rediscover a useless hobby, you must confront an uncomfortable truth. You have been trained to mistrust your own impulses. Every desire that doesn't lead to improvement, productivity, or progress has been quietly dismissed as childish or irresponsible. So when I tell you to reclaim something useless, I'm not merely giving a lifestyle suggestion. I am asking you to dismantle a psychological structure that took decades to build. This is not easy, but it is necessary. Let's begin with the simplest and most revealing question. What did you love before the world convinced you that love must be earned? If you look honestly, you will notice that the activities that brought you the most joy in childhood were rarely productive. They were exploratory, sensorial, playful. You built things that served no purpose. You imagined worlds that benefited no one. You spent hours doing something simply because it felt good to be inside the doing. That part of you is not dead, it is buried. And your first task is excavation. Pick one thing, just one, that you used to love without justification. Don't choose something you're good at. Don't choose something that can be optimized. Choose something that makes no sense to anyone except the child you once were. That might be drawing nonsense shapes, collecting rocks, playing an instrument badly, building Lego sets, wandering without destination, reading a book that does nothing for your career. Choose the activity that feels the most pointless. The soul always hides in places the ego finds embarrassing. Once you choose it, you must protect it. A useless hobby cannot survive in the wild. The achievement mindset will colonize it instantly. Byung-Chul Han understood that performance thinking is insidious. It seeps into everything, even leisure. So you must draw a boundary. Not a soft boundary, a sacred one. Tell yourself, out loud if necessary, this will never be monetized. This will never be optimized. This will never be performed. This is mine. And mean it. Expect resistance. Expect guilt. Expect a tightness in your chest that whispers, you should be doing something else. Modern guilt is not moral. It is economic. You are not violating an ethical code. You are violating an internalized productivity algorithm. That discomfort is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign you are healing. During the activity, your mind will try to drag you back into familiar territory. It will ask, how can I improve? How can I measure this? How can I use this later? Do not obey. Return to your senses. Feel the brush against the paper. Hear the clumsy chord of the instrument. Touch the soil of a plant you're not trying to grow for results. Let the activity be a container large enough for imperfection. Celebrate your mediocrity. It is one of the last remaining places where the world has no claim on you. If you want this practice to change you, you must ritualize it. Humans need ritual because ritual teaches the mind where one world ends and another begins. Choose a small action that signals your transition from the realm of productivity into the realm of being. Lighting a candle, brewing tea, taking a breath that extends longer than you're used to. Without ritual, you will slide back into your habitual speed. With ritual, you create a threshold the psyche learns to recognize. And as the weeks pass, something will begin to shift, slowly, quietly. The way dawn enters a room before you realize the light has changed. You will notice that your anxiety softens, that your mind becomes less hostile, that moments stretch again instead of collapsing into one long blur of tasks. You will feel something you have not felt in years: interior space. A useless hobby does not improve your life in the way society defines improvement. It doesn't make you richer, faster, smarter, or more productive. It makes you something far more rare, whole. It returns you to the rhythm of existence rather than the rhythm of performance. It reconnects you with the forgotten truth that you are not a machine, not a brand, not a project, just a person with desires that have no economic value and therefore infinite human value. And that is why this practice is not indulgence. It is not luxury. It is resistance. A quiet revolution fought not with slogans or protests, but with moments of unapologetic being. When you engage in a useless hobby, you reclaim something capitalism never intended you to touch again, your own soul. Something extraordinary happens when the mind is allowed to do something without purpose. At first, the shift is almost imperceptible, like a muscle awakening after decades of disuse. But with time, the change becomes undeniable. Your psyche begins to reorganize itself around a different logic, a different rhythm, a different understanding of what it means to exist. Byung-Chul Han argues that the modern psyche is not collapsing because it is weak, but because it is overstimulated and overexposed. In a world where every moment is invaded by demands for attention, performance, reaction, and self-improvement, the mind becomes trapped in a permanent state of acceleration. It cannot descend into itself. It cannot synthesize experience. It cannot regenerate. It only accumulates. And accumulation without integration produces not wisdom, but exhaustion. A useless hobby disrupts this cycle because it introduces something the achievement society cannot tolerate: non-teleological time. Time that does not point toward a goal. Time that is lived rather than used. This type of time is rare. It is sacred. And when you practice it, the mind begins to heal in ways that productivity can never offer. The first change is neurological. When you do something without pressure, the brain shifts out of threat mode. Cortisol levels drop. The frontal cortex softens. The default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, reflection, and self-understanding, reawakens. This network has been suffocated by the constant forward momentum of a performance-driven life. A useless hobby gives it oxygen again. Then, a psychological shift begins. When you are no longer measuring yourself, judging yourself, or demanding improvement, your mind redistributes its energy. The anxiety that once fueled your productivity loosens its grip. Thoughts become less hostile. Emotions stop clinging to the edges of your consciousness like static. You begin to feel, not in the dramatic sense, but in the grounded sense of being in contact with your own inner world. Creativity emerges not as ambition, but as curiosity. You start to notice details you previously rushed past: the texture of paint, the slight resistance of clay, the delicate imperfections of a guitar chord, the breath between steps on a walk. This depth of attention is the seed of contemplation, the very faculty that burnout destroys. Over time, something even more profound happens. Your sense of self recalibrates. When you engage in an activity with no purpose, you encounter a version of yourself that is not defined by accomplishment. You meet a quieter identity, one that does not need justification. This identity is softer, deeper, truer. It is the part of you that existed before the world taught you to perform. And when you reconnect with this part, your entire orientation toward life begins to shift. Suddenly, productivity stops being the measure of your worth. You begin to see your goals for what they are: choices, not obligations. You begin to resist pressures that once felt inevitable. You start saying no to demands that used to drain you. You feel less controlled by external expectations, less consumed by the fear of falling behind, less enslaved to the image of the person you think you must become. Most importantly, you regain access to joy, not pleasure, not distraction, not entertainment, but but joy. The quiet satisfaction that arises when you inhabit a moment without forcing it to be something else. It is the joy a child feels when absorbed in play, the joy of existing without needing permission, the joy of being sovereign over your own time. This shift is not superficial. It restructures the psyche. It restores the possibility of depth, presence, and meaning. It rebuilds the inner architecture that burnout collapses. And here is the irony Han would want you to see. When you allow yourself time that is wasted, your productive time becomes more creative, more intentional, and less self-destructive. The paradox is real. By embracing uselessness, you regain the ability to live. A useless hobby returns you to yourself, and that return is not a luxury, it is a resurrection. At some point in your life, you learn to believe that your value comes from what you produce, not from your presence, not from your depth, not from the quiet interior truth of who you are, but from your output. And every day since, the world has reinforced that belief, rewarding your performance while quietly starving your soul. Byung-Chul Han warns that this is not a side effect of modern life. It is its defining feature. The burnout epidemic is not a malfunction. It is the expected outcome of a society that has forgotten what a human being is for. But you, right now, standing at this moment in your life, have the chance to remember. A useless hobby is not simply an escape. It is a rebellion against the idea that existence must earn its right to exist. It is a declaration that your interior life matters, that your joy matters, that your inner world deserves space, breath, time, and dignity. In practicing something with no purpose, you are reclaiming the one purpose that matters, to live a life that feels like yours. When you sit with a hobby that produces nothing, you are saying to the world, my humanity is not negotiable. You are choosing presence over performance. You are choosing depth over acceleration. You are choosing selfhood over self-exploitation. And there is a moment, if you give yourself enough time in this sacred uselessness, when something shifts. You begin to feel the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to justify their existence. You begin to realize that productivity was never the measure of your worth. You begin to understand that rest is not indulgence but truth. And you begin to feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that being human is enough. So let this be your turning point. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now, choose one activity that gives you nothing and gives you everything. Protect it like your life depends on it, because in some deep psychological way, it does. And if this message reached you, if it cracked something open, if it reminded you of who you were before the world taught you to hustle yourself to death, then stay. Subscribe. Join this space. Because here we are doing the slow, necessary work of rebuilding the inner life that the achievement society tried to erase. And if you can reclaim that life, even a little, you are already free.